We continue to see the broader impact on the industry because of this pandemic. Tell us how much of the hit for your business is coming from demand destruction, low volumes, and how much because we're also seeing travel restrictions to contain the pandemic.
This is having a pretty devastating effect on container shipping and the shipping industry as a whole. We've got about 30% capacity is expected to be taken out of the market, certainly in May, which we sort of are seeing as peak pandemic period. What we had early on in the outbreak in February, March, the immediate period after Chinese New Year, was a huge destruction in demand out of China as there was the problems of people getting back to work. But now you've got maybe factories in China, 80% of the workers are back, the production is up, but of course you've just had a fallen off a cliff, the demand in the West, in Europe and in the US. And so you've had, say, maybe each month about 250 sailings blanked, and you've got about 3 million TEU, that's 3 million containers capacity is actually currently withdrawn from the market. So it's having a very, very serious impact on the industry.
Do you have a sense of what industries are seeing the biggest impact when you're looking at where your clients are coming from and what type of cargo business you're getting?
Well, obviously in a time like this, and if you're in lockdown in the UK, then you're not going out shopping. I mean, the shops are closed. So it is really a huge drop-off in demand for manufactured goods, white goods, and when there is uncertainty about the future, people are not going to go out and make big investments in a new car, new white goods for their home. So that's really where you're seeing that falling off. I mean, obviously there are some items where there is huge demand, and a lot of that is actually going on air freight, say personal protective equipment for hospitals, etc. But overall, it is a general decline in demand, and really we've got to get a clear view on how things are developing in terms of the lockdowns before you can actually begin to see any upturn in this. I mean, the restrictions in India have had a big impact on regional trade within Asia. I mean, the long-haul trades from the Far East to Europe and Trans-Pacific, obviously they've been hit with the developments there, but taking out sort of a very big chunk of regional trade, that's affected the smaller ships that trade within the region. So it's really affecting all elements of the business at the moment.
Tim, do you see, after all of this, an economy is reopened, do you see permanent changes to the industry and to the supply chain, be they forced dislocations as a result of supply and demand issues or proactive structural reforms?
Well, that's a good point. It's something that we actually talk about all the time. And 90% of everything goes by sea. So the maritime trade, it's absolutely pivotal in the whole of supply chains. Will the COVID-19 outbreak lead to a structural change in manufacturing? Is this going to be the end of globalization? No, I don't think so. I think it is going to accelerate changes that were possibly already beginning to happen. I mean, I know people who were manufacturing in China and who were already looking at diversifying their supply chain, partly because labor costs in China had gone up so much. And of course, also the politics, trade wars. So there was a lot of manufacturing moving to other places within Asia, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh. So people are going to be much more conscious of their supply chains and probably not want to be overly dependent on one particular region. So I think we are going to see some changes, but these were going to come in any case, rather than being driven solely by this one-off event.
What's your forecast for the recovery going into the second quarter?
I think the second quarter is going to be pretty tough. I think overall this year in the container trades, there is a sense that you might see for a full year volumes declining by about 10%. But when this does begin to return to some degree of normality, what you're going to find is that it isn't just a question of people are going to go out and the economy will be stimulated, but also during this period, inventories have been way run down. So there'll be a need not just to meet immediate demand, but also to rebuild inventories. So container shipping, whilst it will take a big hit right now, it is also one of the sectors that could actually bounce back quite quickly. I mean, in terms of the profitability and losses, I mean, last year, global container shipping amongst the major carriers made a profit of about 5.8 billion US dollars. If volumes drop by 10% for the year, that would probably mean that the losses for the major lines would be about 800 million. Now, that is provided that they manage to maintain the actual rates on the carriage of each container, which so far they've been able to do. But if those rates dropped to the same level of, say, what they dropped in the global financial crisis, then the container shipping industry could make losses of over 20 billion this year, which that would have a very, very significant impact on the long-term health of the business.
Tim, so we have heard economists talk about potential pent-up demand coming surging back, and then that could really help later in the year. Do you see areas of your business where you think that output that has already been lost will not be recovered?
I think, yes, you're already beginning to see that in some ways, and you need to sort of step back to another area of the shipping industry, the bulk shipping industry. For instance, Chinese imports of iron ore, and steel industry is always a great bellwether of the health of economies and what's going to come further down the line. Whereas in container shipping, you're dealing with manufactured goods. So now iron ore imports into China have actually been slightly up in the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter of last year. And there are many different factors other than coronavirus that are affecting those trades in raw materials. But that does point to manufacturing in China coming back, steel industries getting back on its feet. I think that there will be a surge in construction. There'll be stimulus packages in China in particular, which will help the global economy get back on its feet. I mean, you're seeing this with the export of timber out of New Zealand, for instance, where that's been resumed. Very strong demand there from China, a lot of which is used in the construction industry.
Tim, do shipyards recover from this, both on the perspective of cruise liners being essentially, I can't imagine anyone who would want to get on a cruise anytime soon, nor would they be able to. But now when it comes to, the container recovery being fragile at best before we went into this, are we just going to see closures? What does a pipeline look like from your view?
Well, the cruise shipping industry, yes, that obviously has been hit very hard. There are still a lot of cruise ships being built, and demand for those really will, I think, tail off. And it will take a lot of time for that market to recover, because that's very much on a perception basis. It's what people feel like about going on a cruise. It's not like you have to move what you've manufactured. So I think in terms of demand for ships and shipbuilding in the shipbuilding industry, I mean, that really had begun to grind to a halt. Partly not because of the virus, but partly because of the way the transport is changing in terms of, at the moment, it's very difficult to know if you're going to order a ship, what type of propulsion system you should have. Should you have a conventional diesel engine? Should you be going to LNG or hydrogen fuel cells? So there's a lot of uncertainty in the industry now about what is the right ship to build. So that's actually stalling a lot of investment in new ships, combined with the fact that it's actually very difficult to raise finance at the moment to order new ships.